Yo, this is the ancient Texan. I came here to talk a little bit about stories. Human beings and stories. We like to believe that we're logical creatures, that we make up our mind about things and decide in some logical, rational manner. But in fact, most of our decisions are gut reactions that are emotional, and then we invoke logic to rationalize our behavior, primarily for justifying our behavior to others and making ourselves look good. After a while, we just capture our ways of thinking into stories, and the stories kind of embody a way of groupthink, like the world believes in nationalism, that they're country boundaries, that the Indians belong in this boundary and we belong in the bigger boundary, because that's the way it is, the status quo. A lot of stories kind of justify the status quo, and it gives us a feeling that we know more than we actually know. Most stories are inaccurate, incomplete, very often in contradiction to the facts, but we hold on to them anyway. The biggest stories in the world are all around religion. Somebody believes the Quran is the word of God and is delivered by a prophet, and millions of people follow that. And all religions are essentially a story. Don't mean to be offensive, that's my story. I wanted to look at some of the conservative stories. And I'll first admit that my bias is, I guess I'd call myself a ultra-liberal. I kind of believe that only love and compassion is going to save this planet. It's not going to be military, and it's doesn't look to me like right now either party embodies what I believe about life and what I think is important in my values. So this is a look, and you'll pick up my bias, because I obviously have bias, and if you're a believer of the story, then you'll have a bias too, and we have different stories we believe in. They're all inaccurate, incomplete, mostly just made up, not with the facts, but despite of the facts. So, the conservative story in the U.S., although it kind of applies to conservative stories around the world, just a few of the details. First, the conservative story believes in Christianity. That's the story they believe in. And if you look at the Christianity story, two men, Adam and Eve, were created, and they fell from grace, and they're inherently bad. And if you look at the founders of our country, they were very Christian-based. They're very male-oriented, white race, kind of black people and women weren't actually considered people. Our wise founding fathers didn't. At least that was their story. Think about that. So these people we put all this trust in didn't believe blacks and women could vote, and they really didn't believe blacks and women were actually people or citizens in our society. These are the people that we consider the wise founders of our Constitution. There's kind of also a built-in bias of these founders and still in our society that rich people did something right. They deserve their wealth. Wealth has, we're a self-made country, self-made millionaires, and all those things are true. But the story is that your starting place in life doesn't matter. And there's kind of belief that your wealth comes from being pious, by following the scriptures, living a good life, and good things will happen to you. If bad things happen to you, you must be a bad person. Those are stories that are embedded in our culture. We also kind of believe the conservative story is that immigrants are bad. First, a lot of them are the wrong religion. They're poor, and so therefore undeserving. And they're often of the wrong color. Doesn't align with the founders of our country, our wise constitutional scholars and religious leaders of the time that established this country. That's the story. Now let's look at the gun story that conservatives tell. A gun story is part of a bigger story that the man in America, and it's mostly a man-oriented thing, are independent. They're breadwinners. They protect their family. Their family would be better the more guns they have. And guns are a sign of freedom. You can't take my freedom and my rights away. The rights that our religious white fathers bestowed upon us with the Constitution. Those are the rights we're talking about. And it kind of by extension, they're kind of God-given rights as part of this bigger story. That's the conservative story. Now let's see how this conservative story plays out in another arena. Global warming. It's not really about global warming. The conservative story is that there was a time in the past that the white man ruled and was in all his glory. He had great jobs. He kind of ran the world. He was in the greater majority. Things were good back then. Things were good back in the days when we had coal. Solar wind kind of represents the future. It's not the status quo. It's not the good old days. So it's the conservative story on global warming, or that man changes the environment, is based as much in the conservative story as guns are. And they're part of the same myth about how life was. And the white Christian man and his role in society, and his place in this country. So I hope this gives a little nuances to the conservative story, and you can take it on almost any single issue, and the same theme runs through it. We could do a lot of others, and if I get 5 people that pay attention to this broadcast, it might encourage me enough to go into other stories that we have. And it's not just the conservatives. The liberals have a whole set of stories too. It's easier to talk about a story that you don't buy into than it is one that you do, and that's also part of the human nature. It's easy for us to label our stories as superior or someone else's story as inferior, and to find facts that contradict their stories. That's what we do. But we also need to learn that they are stories, and very, very few people dig into the facts and actually know. For instance, I believe that man has a big impact on climate change. Do I know any of the detailed facts? No. I can go to a website and get some supposed facts from conservatives or and people that don't believe in it, and I can go to other websites and get some facts of liberals that do believe in it and point all this data out. But it's actually a very complicated subject that probably a few dozen people at most are competent enough to make that kind of decision. I tend to trust those people and trust the majority, but I don't know enough about the details, and I doubt if anybody listening to this blog does either. It's a story we've adopted, and we have different reasons for adopting the story, but it's at our level of understanding, it's just a story. Anyway, this is the ancient Texan on some conservative stories.